Today we have a panel on monetary reform. Very, very low-key title, very, very high impact significance. And our keynote speaker today is J.W. Smith, PhD. He's the director of the Institute for Economic Democracy, and he's the author of Economic Democracy, The Political Struggle of the 21st Century, and Money, a Mirror Image of the Economy, which is his most recent book. Dr. Smith?
Well, I wish to thank this panel for their efforts to cooperate together to put out the story and make it as powerful as possible. Now, we all agree that the Federal Reserve, has been controlled by the bankers. We all agree on that. But these three books, that's by William Grider, this is here by John Kenneth Galbraith, and this is here the original study by James Livingston on the formation of the Federal Reserve, all say the Federal Reserve is publicly owned by you and me. Okay? This means that the bankers are running the central bank and oversees their private banks, just as the regulatory authorities of all other industries are running the regulation authorities that regulate them. That's standard practice. They know how to do all this. Now, we all know the lenders owns the underlying property when owners go bankrupt. The lenders of last resort to these private banks under this current crisis is the Federal Reserve. And it's hundreds of billions of dollars they've been pouring at them for the past 8 months. Having control of the Fed, like in the Bear Stearns crisis, J.P. Morgan, those who run J.P. Morgan run the Federal Reserve. And they gave themselves these hundreds of billions of dollars, because it went on to lots of other banks that was also bankrupt. And they handed the Federal Reserve, that's you and me, that toxic debt for 90 cents on the dollar, when the market says it was worth only 20 cents to 30 cents on the dollar. And instead of bankers being in charge of the Fed, let's say this panel is in charge of the Fed, okay? And I'm assuming this panel would have taken over those bankrupt banks just like England has taken over theirs. Rather than we got no reason to pour all that money to the ethereal world of high finance. They're big boys. They're able to take care of themselves. Let's assume this panel recognizes the cost of running a banking system, financing only the real economy, as opposed to pouring money at the ethereal world of high finance, is about 1/3 the cost of the present banking structure, which it would be. With security of 100% reserves, which a socially owned bank would have, automatic 100% reserves. They can create the money at any time they want to. Let's assume this panel would say, we'll just do that. Okay? Wait a minute, I didn't read that right. Let's assume with security of 100% reserve and interest, 100% reserves, higher interest on deposits, lower interest to borrowers, customers will abandon their banks, and those abandoned banks will turn in their keys. As this panel, are in control, we would do just that. We now own the banking system, 100%. As banking is only a social technology, the earnings of a nation's banking system would go only to essential services, like health care and retirement. Bank charges and resource rent charges can be adjusted to provide all essential services: rebuilding, health care, retirement, and running all governments. You just have to adjust it to the charges to the costs. It's not very complicated at all. Now, you'll have to attend the Henry George School to understand that society should collect the rental values and pay it right back to the people, and they're triply repaid doing it in the process. Henry George is the one economist they've never been able to challenge. Every economist worth their salt, before they go to their final reward, says Henry George had it right. This experience teaches us how to get rid of all the other monopolies. The monopolies they tell us do not exist. The profits on patents are collected through the stock markets. You simply pay the inventors well, place those patents in the public domain. 85% of the stock markets disappear. There's no longer wealth being appropriated from you and me through the high price of products to pay for those monopolized values. Real tangible values in banking is only the brick and mortar in the banks. All the rest of the banking is non-tangible values built upon the license. No labor, except for a nickel for that license, is all the cost involved. All that is unearned money. All that earned over here. The massive sums that part of the ethereal world of high finance appropriated for you and me remain in our hands. Through the price of your products dropping about 75%. That's the cost of our products. To pay that, all that 85% of the stock market that I just showed you would just disappear from that little change in property rights law as it relates to nature's resources and technologies, not our personal property rights. We're not talking about that at all. Property rights law as it applies to nature, which offers us everything for free. But you don't get it for free as quick as it's monopolized under our property rights law. As efficient as communication looks, it is the most inefficient of all monopolized sectors of the economy. Those communication efficiencies are so massive that it'll soon be possible to educate every child in the world for 5% the cost of brick and mortar schools. I forget the guy's name right now, but he's watching Cambodian children teach themselves on computers. And he allied with Google and MIT, one other group, and they created this $200 laptop computer that they're going to give free to every child in the developing world. That program is already in progress, okay? The information comes right down out of the satellite. They can sit there and work and do anything they want, okay? These programs are already being put in effect in some universities, okay? It's not formally set up, but professors on their own put them up there. You can get all their lessons for free. You can't get no credits unless you sign up and pay, see? But you can do it right now. Take their lessons for free. They're sitting there, okay? Right there you see one aspect of the formation of those monopolies. The entire structure of the university systems, high schools, grade schools, all those teachers, all those people taking care of those buildings, school bus drivers, all of them. Their identity, their living, everything is dependent on it as it is now. And it is not going to change except under crisis. Okay? But every one of these monopolies, they are protected the same way. Everybody within it, their living is dependent upon that monopoly structure. You change that monopoly structure, and they're out of a job. That's why all through my books, I've said you must reduce your work week in line with the increased efficiencies of your economy as you make that more efficient economy. Okay, please stop by our book table and you look at either one of these two books, the last 32 pages, and you can see essentially what I've just told you here at this time. Just read the conclusion, the last 32 pages, of either one of those books. Okay? And you're welcome to stop by there and do that. All waste within the internal economies and all waste within world trade are due to a monopoly structure. This is a monopoly structure that evolved out of aristocracy. They tell you in your university classrooms that we evolved out of aristocracy. We never, ever successfully evolved out of aristocracy. Your property rights law, as it applies to nature's resources and technologies, are nothing but aristocratic law. Who would ever think to looking in your property rights law for the cause of our poverty and the cause of all wars? Right there is where it's at. And every time I come close to a lawyer the past 20 years, I said, inequality is structured in law. Would you take my work and look at it and tell me where it's at? I know it's there, but I can't find it. I was working with Glenn. He knows the story of how starting to put this book together. You got to have an honest economy before you can have an honest banking system. I've been slowly changing my wording system to tease out these pictures, but I still didn't see the big, beautiful picture sitting in my first book 20 years ago. I moved those chapters together to start to write this book. I took one look. I said, holy Christ! Fully 60% of the huge blocks of capital America is worshipped for were not only never necessary, they're reducing the efficiency of the economy by fully 50%. That was the 50% savings I showed possible in our economy 20 years ago. The next thing I said to myself, well, these economic classics are not even philosophies. All they are justifications for a system of theft. Property rights law, as it applies to nature's resources and technologies that she offers to us for free. Not personal property rights. Nature's property rights. Okay? Once you get that picture, the whole world looks different and it gets very simple. Thank you. We're going to move over here and watch it.
Should we shut the lights down?
In a moment. Yeah.
Yeah. I'll just leave it.
I have a presentation of just 12 slides, and there's a hard copy of it for you. We have very limited time to present, so I want to say what I hope you will leave here with clearly in your mind, and that is the subject of my very first slide. You want me to introduce you? Oh, sorry, Glenn.
This is Professor Bob Blaine. He's a professor of sociology emeritus at the University of Illinois. He's written a couple of books on cooperation and on sociology. And since he's retired from the University of Illinois, he has focused on money and the nature of money. And he's also been a delegate to the Provisional World Parliament, and there as a representative of what he's going to be talking about today, the nature of money.
Okay, let's get the slide up there. Come on. Well, you know how to do this? Huh? I've got it on the computer, but I don't have it up there.
Okay, your computer's hooked in? Oh.
Yeah, it's all
And
hooked in. I've already had
did
it
you
up there.
put it on
They said not
laptop?
to- well, no, yeah, but they said not to use that. That's
Don't
the
use
wrong
the
one.
play button until you use the screen.
Let me try this again. It seems to have to do with that.
I'm going to pause my camera for a second.
Yeah. Okay, maybe. I had it working before. There it is there. Why isn't there enough there?
Sorry. All right. Are you feeding it to the external port?
Yeah, see, this here is what toggles it around to different places. If it would go up there, I could deal with it. But I don't know why it's not.
Your wireless connection?
This is wired.
It worked earlier.
Down there,
Yeah.
it's wireless.
It was working. That says computer. There we
All
go.
right, good job.
Okay. This is what I want you to take out from
Not
here.
yet.
Whoops. Sorry. I feel like a steam engine. I'm all steamed up.
Good.
Yeah. You ready? Capitalism is killing us. We got to say it like it is. Capitalism is killing us. You've heard about supply side economics? It's all supply side. That's why they call it capitalism. And all of the conceptions that go with it, the theoretical stuff, is all in favor of capitalism. But what they mean by that is money. They mean money. They don't mean real capital. They mean money. Why do I say this? You listen to what they're talking about now. What's the problem in our economy? Not enough growth. We got to grow. We got to grow. We got to grow. Why do we have all these SUVs on the highway? Because they want to make money. And you can make more money on a big vehicle than you can on a small one. Why do we have homelessness? Because you can make more money in big houses that just sell to people who have a lot of money and make big mortgages and interest payments. Why do banks lend money? To make money. Our focus is always on making money. Doesn't want to leave capitalism. Another word for capitalism, by the way, is plutocracy. We need to talk about plutocracy more. And that's what we have. We don't have a democracy. Some have said we have the best government money can buy. The golden rule. Those with the gold rule. That's what we're facing today. And here's a quick analysis of it. I owe this to Karl Marx, who has it in his book, Capital. Originally, we had commodities trading for commodities, a CC system. That developed into a CMC system where we sold commodities for money, we got money, we bought commodities. However, once that happened, some people thought we'll take money, buy a commodity, and end up with more money, M prime. And that process will continue. Now, you see it here without any commodities. That's how the banking system works. You start with money, you lend it, you get more money. You lend it, you get more money. So our focus today is always on making money, making money. Why do they have textbooks renewed, new editions every couple of years? The content of those textbooks doesn't change. The dates on the references change. But the basic conception has been the same as long as I can remember, 50 years or so. It's to make money. You want to make the previous edition obsolete. That's one of the reasons we have all these costs. Here is what has happened to U.S. personal consumption expenditures in recent times. Now, things weren't bad in 1960, but look at what has happened. The consequence of that, this is why we have, in part, why we have global warming. Here is a landfill, so-called. It's a mountain. The trailer trucks lined up along the base of the landfill suggest its size. This is on the Mississippi River bottom near St. Louis. And it's now about twice that size. This picture was taken 2 years ago. It's killing us. We're using up our resources, and they keep pushing us to buy and buy and buy. When the Twin Towers were hit, what did they tell us to do? Shop. That is nuts.
Don't let the terrorists win.
Shop.
Shop.
Yeah. And now the stimulus package, what's that supposed to do? Shop. And I don't know if it's the same with you as it is for me, but, you know, my house is full of stuff. My closets, you know, I keep telling my wife, don't buy anything anymore. Well, what do you think she does? Now, people will say, oh, capitalism's been good. Look at all the benefits. Wow, you know, the poison is in the dose. Water can kill you if you get too much of it, right? Salt can kill you if you get too much of it. The poison is in the dose. The alternative to capitalism is not socialism. The alternative to capitalism is to get the dose right. Money has no unit of measure. I've given some of you this time money. That's where I'm going with this. Money has no unit of measure, so the dose is trial and error. Measures are defined by actual quantities. The meter is defined by length. The liter is defined by an actual volume. The gram is defined by a weight. Shilling, rupee, and dollar are just words. It's anybody's guess what they represent. What we do in reality is we go and we look at a bunch of prices and we inductively decide how much our money is worth. That's the only case we do that with. In all other cases of measurement, we're given the standard and then we apply it. If we didn't have any standard, you pull up to the gas pump, and they say, here's so many gallons, and you say, gee, it didn't look to me like you put that money in. Well, you'll see. There's a lot of gallons that we just put in your tank. They can't do that because the scales are certified, measured, checked for accuracy. The way they play with us is the price, right? I once paid 17 cents a gallon for gasoline. Time organizes all human activities. You are here now because of time, the calendar, the clock. All economic variables are organized by time. When you have to pay your taxes, how much you have to pay for interest, when your rent is due, when you're supposed to be paid, how many hours you work. All organized on the basis of time except money. Time money. I put this picture up because the Provisional World Parliament in 2004 adopted an hour of work as the world money unit. And in Togo, in the most recent one, the Parliament adopted Earth Hours as the name of it, and that circle with the cross in the center of it as the symbol for the money. And that symbol represents the unity of human beings, north, south, east, and west. And the basic standard with time money is an hour of money for an hour of work. Negotiation can always happen where you make a case you should be paid more, your employer makes the case you should be paid less. All those things still go on, but we talk something everybody understands. Now what I want to do is show how we can use time money to bell the cats. You know that expression? How does the mouse bell the cat? So they know when the cat's around so they can be safe? Well, we can use time money to bell the cats. Here are the cats, a few of them. These are 3 CEOs with ties to the mortgage crisis. They were paid $460 million over 5 years. Wow. A lot of people think, hey, I wish I got that. Lottery winnings are like that. Well, let's bell the cat, which is to say, let's convert that amount of dollars into time. The U.S. gross domestic product is $50 per hour of work. That's the pie that's being produced now. So if we use $50 per hour, $100,000 is 1 year. That is $50 an hour, 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week for 50 weeks. Call that 1 year. In that case, $1 million is 10 years. $10 million is 100 years at $50 an hour. $460 million is 4,600 years of income at $50 an hour. To By that conversion, we have an arguing point that is absent now. We cannot counter that 460. We all know, wow, that's excessive. But I think by dosing it with an accurate measure, measuring the dose with an accurate unit, 4,600 years, I don't think we would see many CEOs getting away with that kind of hoarding. So this is the summary slide. Capitalism is killing us. It's destroying the environment, making money, making money. John Hodson used to say, wouldn't it be a tragedy if we said we can't save the earth, we can't save the human race because we don't have the money? Capitalism is the problem. The poison is in the dose. The money dose is trial and error. Time, money, bells the cats. So if you want to convert those money, this is what I want you to take with you. You can convert all prices meaningfully by dividing them by $50. That gives you the equivalent in hours of work. When you're dealing with millions of dollars, all you got to do is add a zero, and you'll have the number of years that $1 million represents. $100 million prize for a lottery is 1,000 years of income at $50 an hour. Thank you.
Our next speaker, our third speaker today, is Ellen Brown, who is an attorney, and she's author of some 11 books. And in recent years, she's been focusing on money and debt. And her well-known recent book is called The Web of Debt, The Truth Behind Our Monetary System. Ellen?
Thank you. This is my book, of which he spoke. It took me 5 years to write, and so it was really hard to summarize it. But Will Rogers said to summarize what you're going to say, and then say it, and then say what you just said. And I don't think I'll get through all that, so I'll just summarize what I intend to say. So if I don't get through it, these are my points. Except for coins, which compose only 1/1000th. Sorry, except for coins, which compose only 1,000th of the money supply, all of our money is created by banks in the form of loans. The problem with this form of money creation is that banks create the principal, but they don't create the interest necessary to...
You're dropping words.
Oh, okay.
Oh, that's what she said.
Okay. Sorry, I had a PowerPoint with that on it, and I can't find it. No, sorry, it's my mistake. Okay, I'll try one more time. Except for coins, which compose only 1/1000th of the money supply, all of our money is created by banks in the form of loans. The problem with bank-created credit money is that banks create the principal, but they don't create the interest necessary to pay back their loans. Therefore, someone has to continually be taking out new loans just to find the interest to keep the principal in existence that is our money supply. So you have a continually expanding money supply and continual inflation, as Bob Blaine said. The result is a Ponzi scheme or pyramid scheme where you have one bubble after another, and we've now gotten to the point where we can't have any larger Ponzi scheme. The derivative bubble is the latest and greatest bubble, and it's up to, at last report, it was $681 trillion, which is 10 times the gross domestic product of all of the countries in the world. So somebody is faking about the assets they have here, and there's no further bubble that can possibly overcome that one. So that one is collapsing as we speak. I mean, the banks are having to admit that all these assets on their books are not really worth what they're said to be worth, and they may not be worth anything, because a thing is only worth what people will pay for it, and nobody's buying all those mortgage-backed securities anymore. So we're at the point where we can only salvage the system with a paradigm shift. I mean, just like Roosevelt did in 1933, he said, we're bankrupt. And so we have to have a new money system, and this is what we're going to do. We're going to take the dollar off the gold standard because there simply wasn't enough gold to back. At that time, gold backed the dollar 40% by 40%. So when people started getting nervous about the money supply, every time they would take $1 to the bank or $2 to the bank and to get their gold, the bank had to call in $3 worth of loans, which was the money supply. So that meant that the money supply was just collapsing in on itself just like that. So Roosevelt had to take the dollar off the gold standard. And then in 1971, Nixon did the same thing. He took the dollar off the gold standard internationally, and he too had to do it because we had just run out of gold. France had cashed in their gold, and then England tried to do it, and that was going to be a third of our gold supply just in one blow, and it was because we'd gotten heavily in debt because of the Vietnam War, and nobody trusted our finances anymore, or our ability to redeem the dollars in gold. So we're at that point again where there's either we go to a military state, a collapsed economic state, and you can see signs of that is what they're looking at, or in some way we come through with our alternative plan. And what would work is to return to the monetary system that the Founding Fathers actually intended, and the one that made our country great all through the 18th century, which was government-issued money. Instead of bank-created money, you should have government-created money. That's what most people think we have. What we need to do is return to what people think we now have. In other words, the government creates the money, and banks merely recycle pre-existing loans. Okay, that's a little long. I lost my little capsule somehow. But here's my. This is evidence that banks create money, or create our entire money supply. The blue line is M1, which is coins, dollar bills, and checkbook money. So coins and dollar bills are about half that blue line, which is only about 3% of the total money supply. These are the figures of the Federal Reserve put out ever since 1959, up to 2006 when they quit reporting M3. So the question is, what is all this? This money, it wasn't created by the government as coins. It wasn't created as paper dollars. It wasn't created by anyone who acknowledges having created that money. If you ask banks, they'll say, no, we don't create money. Well, where did it come from? That money, well, so many people, many authorities have said that banks create money. I have a long list of quotes, but I'll just read one if I can find them. All right. Well, take number 2. Graham Towers said, banks create money. That is what they are for. The manufacturing process to make money consists of making an entry in a book. That is all. Each and every time a bank makes a loan, new bank credit is created, brand new money. He was governor of the Bank of Canada. What happens when you take out a loan is that the bank writes the money as a deposit into your account. Let's say you take out a $500,000 loan for a mortgage. So they write $500,000 into your account as a liability to themselves because they owe you that money. But at the same time, they write it as an asset to themselves because it's a negotiable instrument with the current value. So when they look at their books and they say, we haven't created anything, we have a plus and a minus, and it all comes out to zero. Of course, at some point you spend that money, but the banks are allowed, under the 10% reserve requirement, or now it's down to 3% depending on the size of the bank, to create 10 times as much credit as they have reserves. So when somebody takes that, when you spend the $500,000, let's say they had $100,000 in the bank to start with, and the bank says, well, all right, we still met our 10% requirement, and then that $500,000 winds up in some other bank, which counts it as a deposit and uses it as the basis for 10 times that much credit, and it just expands and expands. fact, our whole money supply is our federal debt. The money supply comes, this isn't quite the scale, but this is 10 trillion here, and this is 9 trillion with the federal debt at about the same time. The federal debt never gets paid off. It hasn't been paid off since Andrew Jackson. It just grows and grows and grows. So what happens is the government issues bonds, trades them with the Federal Reserve or the banks for dollars, and the bonds are never paid off. They're just rolled over. So money has been created, but that money is owed back to the bank with interest. Now, the government could have and should have issued that money itself. Debt and interest-free. It would not be any more inflationary than what we have. In fact, it would be less inflationary because you wouldn't have a large chunk of money always going to interest to service the debt. And so the government could use that money to build things. So if you make things, if you increase supply along with demand, you don't have inflation at all. And since I'm probably going to run out of time, I want to jump to Richard Cook's really clever. These are Richard Cook's figures, but I thought this was so good. I quoted him in my book, and in my later, I revised it in 2008, and I put this in there. This is our 13 trillion is the gross domestic product. We only earning power is only 10 trillion. So where does the extra? It takes $3 trillion more than we earn to buy our own goods and services. Where does that money come from? We borrow it from banks. The government could, if banks were not allowed to issue money, in other words, the banks make the money as it is borrowed. If banks were not allowed to do that, the government could issue this sum of money, $3 trillion, 3.77 trillion. If you count from here, which includes about 10% that's not spent on goods and services but is reinvested, the government could spend $3.77 trillion without causing inflation at all. What you would be doing is matching supply with demand, demand being money, and you need enough money to match your supply. Another way to look at it is this is the potential earning power or the potential productive power of the country, because according to John Williams' shadow government statistics, the actual unemployment rate is 12%. So if you had everybody working, producing things, you could have $14.75 trillion worth of goods and services. So you would need that amount of money to balance out the goods and services. So the government could, even just not counting this, but just from what it produces to here, it could add another 1.77 trillion. So there's plenty of room for the government to issue money and create things with it, like roads, bridges, affordable housing, and a sustainable energy development, and all those things would pay for themselves. Sustainable energy, if you didn't have to pay interest, interest is 50% of the cost of everything, apparently. Somebody figured that out, some German woman. So if you didn't have to pay interest, like states, if they didn't have to pay interest, and were just allowed to borrow interest-free money, or in other words, monetize their own credit against the federal credit, then things that were otherwise not self-sustaining could be self-sustaining. They could generate enough income from what they produce to pay for themselves. So there's a great potential. Our sense that we are living in a scarcity economy is because this parasitic banking institution is siphoning money off the top all the time. If we created our own money in a straight credit system, we would be living in abundance and we could create anything we wanted. If I have time, and there's this great quote in this morning, Ralph said that he went to Cuba and some students said to him, could you explain to me tell me about the shortage of raw materials in the United States? And Ralph said, well, I don't think there is a shortage. Where did you get that idea? And he said, well, if there's no shortage, why do you have homelessness? So that's the point, that you could, if you've got the materials and you've got the labor, the only thing you're missing is the money. So you issue the money, as you, the government, issue the money to pay for the labor and the materials, and you put them together, and you've got a thing that is self-funding. It's not inflationary because you created something of value that returns value to the system. That's all.
Okay, our fourth speaker on our panel today, Richard Cook. He's a former federal government analyst, and if you were at the plenary session this morning, you know he's a whistleblower for the Challenger disaster when he was working for NASA. They tried to cover up that disaster, and he was one of the whistleblowers leading to investigation of it. He's a leading scholar of monetary theory and economic reform, and he's the author of the book Challenger Revealed, an Insider's Account of How the Reagan Administration Caused the Greatest Tragedy of the Space Age. Ricky?
Thank you, Tom. I need to be close to this and that, I suppose. So can I pull this back a little bit? Is this okay? Am I talking into the microphone? Okay, thanks. Also, I passed around my flyer. I've got a new book coming out. In fact, I just was talking to the publisher at lunchtime today about getting the blurb on my book into their current catalog. It's called We Hold These Truths, The Promise of Monetary Reform. It's being published by Tendril Press, which is a small trade publisher. They're hoping to get big. They're small now. In Denver, Colorado. This book we hope will be coming out this fall. They started the editing on it. And what you're going to hear today is in the book. I want to bridge the gap between what we're doing here today in the morning session, because what I'm going to go over here is the economics of empire. Everything that we've been hearing is very, very important because there's a small but growing worldwide monetary reform movement. And what you're hearing today from the speakers here, and I think you'll be hearing us throughout the conference and other sessions, is really, is really our explanation of what we heard about this morning. We heard some pretty awful things about the state of the world. And those of us in the monetary reform movement are convinced that much of what we have heard about is caused by an economic and a monetary system. By the same token, much of what we think needs to be done to correct that can be sought for and found in the economic and monetary system. And so that's what you're getting here from people who have studied this really their whole lives, and it's very, very important. And what I'm going to do, I wrote this long lecture I was going to read, but at lunch I wrote this instead, this chart. So I'm going to put the chart up, and it's going to contain the lecture in a picture. And so I hope that you'll be able to follow along with it. And I want to say that one of the things maybe I'll do between now and next year's conference, if I'm invited back, is to try to take the other presentations that you've heard today on monetary reform and show how they fit into this model, because I do believe they fit. You may say, well, you know, one speaker said one thing, one said another thing. But if you really study the different approaches people take, and everybody comes at this a little bit differently from their own interests, their own specialty, their own experiences, but I can assure you the monetary reform movement is really coming together. And the people that you hear, even though you're hearing different angles, are all really talking about the same thing. And it really comes down to going from the economics of empire to the economics of democracy. So that's where we're headed, and I think we're all heading there together. Now, what I'm going to do is give you a model, which is, some people call this the A plus B theorem, the A plus B model. But in reality, it goes to the gap between aggregate prices, which Ellen was pointing out, which is measured by the gross domestic product, and earned income, which is what people earn and take in and have available as purchasing power. So if we call, we're going to do, first of all, that doesn't work. This is not high tech. All right, if we call this prices, and prices are the GDP, which is about, well, I'm going back to 06, $13 trillion. That's what the GDP is worth. So in order
to pay for the GDP, money has to come into the system in the same quantity or value as the GDP measures. Now, the GDP does include things that maybe shouldn't necessarily be there. For example, the resource monopolies that Dr. Smith was talking about. You're going to find those in prices, but you're also going to find it in purchasing power because somebody is going to benefit from that. And so you have, down here at a lower level, you have income or purchasing power, which is a variable that is somewhere in the neighborhood of $10 trillion. So we'll call that purchasing power 10 trillion. And the purchasing power is primarily made up of what people have available to spend in a particular accounting cycle. So we'll call this accounting cycle 2006, since that's where these figures are from. And the available income or purchasing power is composed of three principal elements: wages, salaries, and dividends. That's what people have available to spend in the accounting cycle. And in 2006, it was about 10 trillion. That leaves what we call the gap. And in the A plus B theorem, all that says is this is A, this is B, and together they compose the entire GDP, the entire price system. But the difference between the two, or B, is the gap. That gap has to be filled, because if you can't fill that gap, people can't buy what's produced, and so the economy will go into a depression. Now, John Maynard Keynes knew all this very well. In fact, the theory that I'm talking about really dates back to 1918, when a book was published in England called Economic Democracy by a British engineer named C.H. Douglas. And this whole idea of the gap between prices and income is something that's been known for a long time. Keynes himself figured it out, and he called this figure up here prices aggregate demand. That was the term that he used in his general theory. And it's been the basis of economic theory ever since, because every economist, whether they will tell you or not, or whether they know it or not, is trying to figure out how to fill that gap. That's the purpose of economics, to create a functioning economy and to fill the gap and to achieve aggregate demand, because if you can't achieve aggregate demand, people don't have jobs. And the purpose of economics, since it really developed out of the 30s when the whole economy crashed, is to create jobs, is to create employment. And so that's what Keynes was trying to do. All right, so the question then becomes, how do you fill the gap? And the gap in Keynesian economics is savings. Keynes said that the big problem came out of the 30s, out of the Depression. The reason that aggregate demand could not be achieved was savings of different types. Now, why do you have to have savings? You have to have savings because it's inherent in a modern industrial economy that you are subject in your producing processes to what is called entropy. And entropy, another term from entropy, is the law of diminishing returns. That means as you produce, as you create an industrial process, and the whole economy increasingly becomes an industrial process, a mechanized process, you're using up your resources. You're using up your raw materials, you're using up your labor resources, because the most employable people are the ones you're going to hire. As you go down through your production process, the people are less employable, they need more training. So you have a law of diminishing returns and entropy. The way you overcome that entropy in an industrial economy, and every person who plans and operates an industrial economy knows it, is through savings. It's through retained earnings. That's what retained earnings are. That's why IBM, for instance, when they have their receipts coming in for the year, don't pay everything out in wages, salaries, and dividends. And of course, the stockholders complain about it. They complain to high heaven, you're not paying us the dividends. And the reason they're not, of course, they're paying their managers more than they should get. But, that's a different issue. That's a justice issue, and it's important, but it's not what we're talking about. They've got to hold the money back because they've got to explore for more resources. They've got to invest in new productive processes. They've got to invest in the workforce. That's retained earnings, that's savings, and that money does not go to buying the product, the gross domestic product of the nation. it goes into a bank usually, and the banks do not invest that money, contrary to popular belief, in productive processes. They put it into assets. They park the money somewhere. You know, they lend it out for houses, they lend it out for equity investments or something. By and large, and if you want to hear an economist wax eloquent on this, talk to Michael Hudson. By and large, what goes into the banking system is not for investment. Investment comes out of the capital markets, not out of the banking system. Banking investments, by and large, are leveraged investments for assets. So they come out of the productive cycle. They're not available to purchase the gross domestic product. They kind of disappear from the system during a given economic cycle. And remember, we're here in 2006, so we've got a gap. We've got a $4 trillion gap, which is a very big gap, and it's the same every year. So how do you fill that? Okay, we're back into Keynesian economics again. Number one, remember, we're trying to fill the gap to achieve aggregate demand. Number one, system failed me. Oh, okay. All right, good, thank you. All right, I'll go to red again. Okay. And you can probably, you know, come up with these yourself. Number one, growth. If your GDP is growing, if your economy is growing, it's going to be more dynamic, it's going to generate more wages, salaries, and dividends, so you've got a growth economy. Another name for the growth economy, the imperative growth economy, is the rat race. Right? You've constantly got to grow. You've constantly got to do more because you're running away from the gap. You're trying to fill that gap, and any business manager knows you've got to do it. So you try to grow your business. Number two, trade. You've got to sell more to the other countries than they buy from you. Right? You've got to have a positive trade balance. And so, coming out of World War II, the United States did. We had a positive trade balance for 20 years. Why? Because the IMF lent people trillions of dollars and they came back and bought our stuff. There was a headline yesterday, we just sold $3 billion worth of armaments to Iraq. For what? Well, we don't care. You know, that came in as part of our trade balance. That's why we're the biggest arms merchant in the world. Another word for trade in this economy is war. Because it pits each nation against each other nation. It's the war of each against all, as Thomas Hobbes said. Keynesian economics, once your growth runs out, once an economy becomes like the United States, a low-growth economy, and we kick over into trade, we're into a war economy, automatically. And so now we're running all over the world. We have our troops in 166 nations. This is why. This model explains it. All right. We've lost our trade balance, right? We're still trying to sell people stuff, but we've got a negative trade balance, and it's $500 billion a year, and China is, you know, selling us all our Christmas tree ornaments. All right, number three. Once growth winds down, once trade fails, debt. All right, back to blue. I give up. Just have to take notes. Debt. Once we lose growth, once we lose trade, we're into debt. So now, what are we doing? What are we trying to sell overseas? We can't sell our stuff anymore. Germany makes more than we do. China makes it. Japan makes it. We're now selling our debt. We're selling Treasury securities to the tune of, again, $500 billion a year. It's just another foreign trade thing. And in order to be sure that other countries buy our debt, by coincidence, we put armies on their soil. It's to protect dollar hegemony, is what it's called. And it really began going in a big way in the 1970s, when we went off the dollar as a gold standard altogether for international trade. What we began to market in the 1970s, because we couldn't sell our goods overseas, we began to sell our debt. And so the dollar became the world reserve economy, and now we're fighting the euro, and we're fighting the yuan, and we're fighting everybody else's currency. Why are Iraq, Iran, and North Korea the axis of evil? Because they all said they're going to the euro for their oil sales. It all has to do with filling the gap. All right, so that's number three. Number four, you're not growing anymore. You're not trading. You've got all this debt to unload. Well, number four, if you can't get rid of the gap that way, you inflate your currency. You inflate your currency. And bank financing and a big government debt, as you all know, leads to inflation. And that's what we're seeing right now. We're seeing the next phase of this model rolling out. When all else fails, you inflate the currency. Why? Well, two reasons. One is I can drive your salary into a higher income tax bracket by inflating it. I can drive you into the alternative minimum tax, and I can make a lot of money to pay my government bills by taking it away from the taxpayers. So that's one big reason. Secondly, I can drive down the overall value of my foreign debt, the money I owe China, the money I owe Japan, by inflating it so they're getting dollars of less value than what they paid for originally. That's why the Federal Reserve has been dropping down its interest rates, to inflate the dollar, and that's one reason we're seeing $133 a barrel oil. That's one reason we're seeing such inflation in food commodities. It's the devaluation of the dollar. It's something that we're all familiar with. So those are the four things that governments, and it's not just the United States government, it's every government in the world. We're winning because we have such a big military, or we have been winning, and that's coming to an end. But those are the things that governments do to fill this gap between prices up here and purchasing power down here. Now, does it have to be this way? And the answer is no, it does not have to be this way. What do you do about it? Well, it's really as much a political problem as an economic problem, because there are people who benefit from growth, who benefit from trade, who benefit from war, who benefit from debt, who benefit from inflation. There's a huge vested interest in all this, and at the very top of the heap of the vested interest are the financiers. This is why the international financial elite rules the world. It's because they are able to take advantage of the gap between purchasing power and prices and fill that gap with debt. And of course the debt grows. And Ellen made a very good point about how the debt multiplies and how the debt itself takes over and strangles the rest of the economy. And if I had a pen that worked, oh, there we go. All right, here we go, debt. Debt balloons. It balloons in bubbles. We've had, in the 80s, we had the merger acquisition bubble. In the 90s, we had the dot-com bubble. In the 2000s, we've got the housing bubble, the equity bubble, the hedge fund bubble, the derivative bubble, the oil bubble, and the commodity bubble. And it's a cancer. The system, it's a cancer in the system. And now there's such a debt overhang. You've got a GDP of 13 trillion. You have piled on top of that, just within the United States economy alone, forget the derivatives, you've got a debt overhang of $50 trillion. That's for households, governments, and businesses, student debt, credit cards, 50 trillion. And that's what our economy is working to pay off on a national income or purchasing power of $10 trillion. It's killing the system. It's collapsing. And they don't know what to do about it, except to inflate it some more and maybe even try to distract attention from it by another big war. Okay. All right. Almost done. How do you fill the gap? You fill the gap through publicly created funds that are generated not out of borrowing and not out of taxation. There's such a thing as credit. Credit, by definition, is the productive potential of the nation. One of the things I've been arguing in my writings is that credit really is a natural resource, just as water is, as air is, as electricity is. It should be regulated by and for the public as part of the public commons. There are two different ways that you can fill the gap by that kind of self-generated credit. One, Ellen pointed out, is government-sponsored spending, where you generate from the natural credit of the nation the kind of infrastructure programs that came out of the New Deal. Roosevelt did this. Roosevelt had some understanding of this. The New Deal was filling this gap with public expenditures at very, very low interest rates, 1% to 2%. The second way, which is what I'm advocating and what I'm writing about, is through what we call the National Dividend. You have an example in Alaska with the Alaska Permanent Fund, where every resident of Alaska last year got a cash payment of $1,700, not based on taxes, not based on borrowing, but based on the resource royalties of the state. That's an example of a dividend. My calculation is that the amount of money that's available within our economy to fill the gaps through publicly generated expenditures, both individual dividends or government-generated spending, is $12,000 per capita per year. For a family of four, $48,000. That is our heritage from the public commons of credit based upon the productive capacity of our economy. That $12,000, which you should have gotten and I should have gotten, is what the banks got by lending to you. It's what the government got by inflating your currency, by selling your future to China through government-generated bonds. That money should have been spent internally through a government-generated dividend, both for public expenditures and an individual stipend, similar to the Alaska Permanent Fund. You'll read about it in the book I'm writing. I hope when it comes out you'll get a copy. And I'd be glad to speak to you about it. If you want to sign up for my mailing list, the email to send to is economicsanity@gmail.com. We'll keep you informed about when the book comes out and give you any further information that you'd like to have about this. So thank you very much.